Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to change the oil on a 2017 Toyota Highlander. Alright, so very first thing to notice is the temperature of the engine before you get started. So hot oil flows faster and makes the job a little bit quicker, but being hot, it also means it might burn you. So personally, I try to get the engine temperature just over the low indicator line, so that way the oil is warm, but it's not going to be too toasty. But while the car's temperature is either warming up or cooling down, go ahead and collect your materials. So I'm using a Mobil 1 0W20 synthetic oil. You're going to need 5.8 quarts for the 2017 to 2019 3.5 liter V6s. And for other years or engine sizes, either do a Google search or check your owner's manual. That will tell you your oil capacity. For this car, I'm also using a Mobil 1 replacement filter. The part number is M1C-251A, but any reputable brand of oil and oil filter is probably going to be fine. You'll also need a funnel, an oil catch can, a disposable towel or a rag, a 14mm wrench or socket, preferably with 6 points, a Toyota oil filter housing adapter, which I've linked in the description below, a 3/8 inch ratchet with an optional extension of at least 3 inches, and I also used a 1/2 inch ratchet with a 21mm socket for my oil filter adapter, but other brands might use a different size. But with all of that, we're going to start by getting the car elevated, either driving it up onto ramps like I'm doing here, or you can jack up the car and use jack stands to hold it in place. But once you do that, go ahead and pop the hood. And before doing absolutely anything, make sure you can remove your oil fill cap, that way you can add new oil in later, and then go ahead and check the current oil level using the dipstick. If the oil level is low right now, your engine might be leaking or consuming oil, so you should keep an eye on that going forward. And you'll see that this one is a little bit low, but not low enough for me to be concerned. The next thing we're going to do is go below the car. So first I'm going to put down a cardboard sheet that's going to catch any spills or splashes and prevent my driveway from getting stained. And then we're going to put the oil catch can on top of that. And both of these are going to be placed roughly below the oil drain bolt to start. And if you're crawling underneath the car from the front, the oil drain bolt is going to be located here. You want the oil catch can offset a little bit behind the drain bolt to account for the fact that the fluid is going to be flowing out. Next, make sure you have a rag on hand and that the plugs on the catch can are actually open to let the oil flow into it. Then you can go ahead and use the 14mm wrench or socket to remove the oil drain bolt. And here's a pro tip: keep a little bit of finger pressure on the bolt as you're backing it out those last couple of turns, because even when the threads are fully disengaged, that finger pressure should be enough to prevent the oil from spraying down on your arm. So what you can do is just really quickly pull your arm and the bolt away once it's fully unthreaded, and that'll minimize the amount of oil that you get on yourself and minimize the amount of mess that you make. So go ahead and stand that bolt with the threads facing up on that cardboard sheet. You're just going to leave that to the side for now and let the oil drain out of the engine while keeping an eye on the catch bin to make sure that it doesn't overflow. If needed, you can also reposition it slightly, but just keep in mind that the fluid is going to slosh around if there's a lot of it. And with most of that oil drained out, you can now go ahead and relocate the catch can to be below the oil filter housing. We're now going to take that 3/8 inch ratchet with the extension and we're going to remove the drain plug from the bottom of the oil filter housing, and most catch cans should be able to span the distance between the bottom of this oil filter housing and the first oil drain bolt that we pulled out. That said, if yours is not big enough to span the distance between these two, you can go ahead and start threading that drain bolt back in before moving the catch can over. But at this point, we're going to fully remove that cap on the oil filter housing, which is going to allow that housing to drain out. And after that housing's been drained out, go ahead and reinstall that filter housing drain plug, and you're just going to do it loosely, that way you're not dripping more oil as you start to remove the entire housing. At this point, you can use the Toyota oil filter housing adapter and slowly rotate that as you're pushing it down onto that oil filter housing. And once you get it lined up properly, it'll really sink down onto there and become very secure. And like I said before, my adapter uses a 21mm socket with a 1/2 inch ratchet to turn it, but other adapters may differ depending on the brand. Once the oil filter housing is removed, go ahead and dump any of the residual oil and the old filter into the top of that catch can. And then if you look here on the side of the oil filter housing, you're going to see that there's this old O-ring that's around the base. So take note of where that is. There should be a groove that it sits in. Go ahead and take the old O-ring off. You're just going to throw that out, and your new filter should come with a replacement O-ring. And before you put on the new O-ring, cover it with a thin film of oil before placing it into the groove. That's going to help it create a better seal, so you're less likely to have oil dripping out, but it's also going to help prolong the life of that O-ring. And if your gloves are already covered in oil from everything else that you've already drained, that should be enough to cover this gasket. You don't really need a ton on there. And similarly, the drain plug in the bottom of the oil filter housing is going to have an O-ring on on it as well. You're also going to replace this O-ring in the same manner. Look at where the current one is located, go ahead and remove it from the bottom of that cap, and then cover the new one with a thin film of oil prior to installing. After that, the drain plug for the oil filter housing is going to get reinstalled, and you're going to torque that to 9 foot-pounds. Next, take out your new oil filter and then insert it into the housing by pressing it firmly into place, and then you can start threading the housing back onto the engine by hand, making sure that that filter stays vertical. The oil filter housing might provide a little bit of resistance, but it should go in fairly smoothly from start to finish, and if it's not going on easily and there's still threads exposed, something's probably misaligned, so you'll have to take it out and check the alignment before putting it back into place. And now that the housing is fully back onto the engine, go ahead and torque this to 18 foot-pounds. At this point, the oil should be fully drained from the original oil pan drain bolt that we took out, and at the very most, it should be a very slow and minor drip. So if that's the case, go ahead and reinstall that oil pan drain bolt after making sure that the threads are clean, which means that if you drop this bolt on the ground at any point in the process, you really want to make sure that you clean it off properly prior to putting it back in the engine. Just like the oil filter housing, it is best to start this bolt by hand, and once it's fully tightened, go ahead and torque it to spec at 30 foot-pounds. And with everything under the car torqued to spec, you can now take your rag and wipe up any residual oil on the bottom of the car, because anything that you don't get here is either going to drip off later or is going to burn off as you run the engine, which is not the best smell. At this point, you are now ready to go back to the top of your engine bay. Using the funnel, go ahead and refill the engine oil, and like I said earlier, the V6 model, which is shown here, uses 5.8 quarts for the 2017 to 2019 model years. And pro tip, wrapping a rag around the base of the funnel is a very easy way to catch minor spills. Now typically I'll add about 0.2 quarts less than I think I need, give the oil a little bit of time to settle, and then check the level using the dipstick. I typically target a level that's in the middle to the high side of the fill lines, but technically anywhere between the high and the low markers is acceptable. That said, if you've added too much, the only way to really get it back out is to pull that drain bolt again on the bottom, which is a much messier process than having to add a little bit more in, which is why I typically start with underfilling it and then add a little more as I go. But once you're happy with the fill level, go ahead and replace the dipstick and reinstall the fill cap using the rag to wipe up any spills, drops, or excess. And now we're ready to start the car up and to check for any leaks. And if you haven't done this before, any leaks should be fairly obvious. But what you want to do is start the car, and then with the car running, quickly look under the front, check around the oil filter housing and the oil drain bolt to check for any signs of a leak or oil dripping. If you see a leak, go ahead and shut the car off as quickly as you safely can, but if you don't see any, go ahead and give the car a minute to warm up, then rev the engine to approximately 2,000 to 3,000 RPM, hold it at that RPM for a few seconds, and then go back under to check again. And if you're not seeing anything, congratulations, you are almost done. The only thing left at this point is to reset the oil maintenance light using the procedure that I've linked in the description below, and after that, you're good to start cleaning up your tools and putting everything away. So that'll do it for this episode. I hope this helped you guys out. I want to thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.